National and to a rather curious phenomenon. Stuff is reporting that the small town of Opotiki in the Bay of Plenty is being overrun with wandering horses. About 100 horses, in fact. And with us now to explain the situation on the ground is Gary Paltridge from Foursquare Opotiki to report from the scene as our equestrian correspondent. Gary, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
How long has this been going on, Gary?
Oh, it's been going on for years. It's always been a problem, and it's just waiting for something bad to happen. But yeah, we've been lucky up until now, I suppose.
And
it adds a bit of character to the town when the horses are, going to the town. But it's with the riders, it's not an issue. But the outskirts of town is where the issue is, with the horses, whether they break out of where they are or they're not tethered and end up on the road. Causing this, that's when it causes a issue.
Good grief. And has it got worse since lockdown?
No. I don't think it has. It's always been an issue. It's no worse, no better.
And so you're in the Foursquare. Do the horses come by the Foursquare?
Yep, quite often. They've always got the riders on. The issue is on the outskirts, but in town itself, it's normally got a rider on it. And we've had the occasion where a rider brought the horse up to the entrance of the shop, and the horse decided to have a look inside. So it was a bit of fun, but yeah. And it's quite good for the workers, the kiwi fruit workers and that, to see the horses in town. It kind of adds to the vibe of the town.
Wallace, I would have thought they could turn this into a feature and tourists...
Sorry?
They could turn it into a feature and tourists would, I'm sure, come flocking. It sounds such a wonderful problem to have. These
Did you hear that,
lovely
Gary?
Horses floating around.
I can only just hear you. You're fading away.
Yes, Sue, our panellist, was saying that you could turn into a bit of a feature, advertise the fact that horses are roaming around.
Yeah, it's not many towns, I would say, that'd be like us, where
Exactly.
It's quite accepted to have the horses walking through town. So.
Well, Liam's from a rural area. Liam, what do you think of this?
Well, it sounds like a biblical plague to me. I mean, I grew up...
Yeah.
Sounds like it's wonderful
The
to
eighth
me.
plague of Egypt, yeah.
I've been here 7 years, and I love the place. It kind of adds to the character of the place.
Of course it does.
Well, good luck with all the horses, Gary. Anything happening on them? I mean, are they just going to stay there, are they? Like the chickens in Titirangi?
It's always going to be an issue because they do escape, or they break their, the rope or whatever's tethering them, and yeah, it'd always be an issue. But yeah, as long as it doesn't get any worse and no one gets hurt, should be right.
Yeah. All
Doesn't
right,
sound
Gary.
like a problem to me.
No. And
Thanks, guys.
thank you very much for being on the program. It's Gary Paltridge from the wonderful Foursquare in Opotiki there. Quite a few recipes coming in for you to try, Liam.
Great. I should have just lied. I have to follow through now.
Yes, you do. You can't just make cheese and toast for your
Liam,
family.
you do have to cook these days,
Yeah,
It's
I
just
know.
you can't get through life.
Can you imagine
Does your wife do all the cooking? I mean, that's
She
the
likes it.
19th century.
Oh, my God, Sue. What do we do?
It's just not on, Liam.
Yep.
You've
All
got
right.
to do better.
I'll give it a go.
All right. On that wonderful note, Sue Catchley, Liam here, thank you so much. And a big thank you to my producer, Amelia Langford, for putting the week's shows together. I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint next. See you Monday, 3:45.
Kei te whakarunga mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Nita Blake-Person in for Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, a massive plan with a massive price tag. National vows to spend $31 billion to get New Zealand moving. Chris Bishop joins us live to discuss today's infrastructure announcement. New Zealand Rugby kicks Sansa into touch, announcing plans for a new franchise competition, including a team from the Pacific. We'll have all the details. Queenstown and Invercargill hotels are ruled out as hosts for managed isolation or quarantine. The COVID crisis deepens in Australia, 428 new cases and 3 more deaths in the state of Victoria. Tighter restrictions are enforced on gatherings in New South Wales. And kia ora, magazines hit the shelves from next week, or should we say a seat pocket in front of you.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata with DNA. Tunnels through mountain ranges and another Auckland harbour crossing are just some of the ambitious ideas National has unveiled as part of a $31 billion infrastructure package. The party's plan, if elected to government, was announced by new leader Judith Collins in Auckland today. Here's political reporter Joe Moyer.
Just over half of the $31 billion announced would be invested in the upper north. The big-ticket items include tunnels under the Brynderwyne and Kaimai mountain ranges to connect Whangarei, Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga, rail to the airport, new busways and an expanding of the Auckland ferry network. Judith Collins also wants the Resource Management Act gone, but the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says today's announcement sounds like more promises, ghost roads and media releases. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
The Southern District Health Board backs the government's decision to rule out Queenstown and Invercargill as locations for managed isolation facilities for people arriving in the country. The minister responsible, Megan Woods, visited all three areas this week and says Queenstown and Invercargill are not suitable. The Southern DHB has already publicly expressed its preference for Dunedin. Its chief executive, Chris Fleming, says Queenstown is lacking in some medical services that those returning may need. Victoria has recorded another 428 cases of the coronavirus in the last 24 hours, the 12th day in a row the Australian state has had a triple-figure increase in cases. The ABC's Bridget Rollison reports.
There's been 428 cases of coronavirus in Victoria overnight. A man and a woman in their 80s and a man in his 70s have brought the state's death toll to 32. Premier Daniel Andrews says testing will be stepped up in regional areas after an increase in cases.
If you are out and about in regional Victoria and you don't think you can maintain that social distance, then we are requesting of you that you wear a mask.
Mr Andrews says additional lockdown measures are being considered if case numbers don't decrease.
Bridget Rollison reporting. Heavy rain and thunderstorms have caused flash flooding, slips and brought down trees across the far north today. Numerous highways and local roads have been inundated and emergency services have been called to flooded properties. Moerewa has been particularly hard hit with reports of homes and businesses flooded. A heavy rain warning is in place for the region north of Whangarei and Dargaville tonight. A judge has questioned why the police put out a public media release clearing an officer of wrongdoing after he shot a man dead in Waitara. In April 2000, Stephen Wallace was shot dead by Senior Constable Keith Abbott. He was acquitted of murder in 2002 after the Wallace family took a private prosecution. The family has now taken a civil claim against the police in the High Court at Wellington. During the Crown's closing arguments today, a police media release from August 2000 was shown. It said an investigation had cleared Mr Abbott and he was not being prosecuted because he acted in self-defence. That release was questioned by Justice Ellis.
Coming out and saying that the officer acted in self-defence is pretty prejudicial in terms of a future trial.
The case is expected to continue into next week. Protesters who marched through Auckland today fear a rubbish dump earmarked for Dome Valley could pollute the Kaipara and Hōteo rivers. Waste Management has purchased a block of land 70 kilometres north of the city with the intention to make it Auckland's main rubbish dump. Ngāti Whātua representative Dame Nida Glavish says the stakes are too high and the dump site must be relocated.
I grew up on the shores of the Kaipara Harbour. From that Hōteo River runs a little creek called Waikiri. That's where we used to bathe when I was a child. That runs right in front of my marae, Puatahi. It's under threat.
Auckland Council will be accepting public submissions on the resource consent until the end of this month. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 5. A new Super Rugby competition is to be launched next year, minus South Africa, Argentina and Japan, but including a Pacific team. The competition has emerged from a report New Zealand Rugby has carried out over the past 3 months, which recommends establishing a competition involving the 5 current New Zealand franchises and a Pacific team, with 8 to 10 teams in total. That leaves room for 2 to 4 Australian teams, and NZR's Chief Executive Mark Robinson is seeking expressions of interest from existing Super Rugby franchises and other parties.
We really don't know in terms of the numbers that will come from anywhere, not just Australia, but Pacifica. So we're not predetermining that at this stage. But the criteria will have reference to high performance aspect. It'll have reference to financial criteria as well.
Mark Robinson, the Chief Executive of New Zealand Rugby. The All Whites coach Danny Hayes says his side will be able to test themselves against some of the best players in the world when they face FIFA's top-ranked team Belgium in October. The match in Brussels has been pencilled in for October the 8th. The last time New Zealand played a side the calibre of Belgium was in the 2010 World Cup when they drew with Italy. Meanwhile, the A-League will resume tonight after a 4-month hiatus, with the third-placed Wellington Phoenix playing top of the table Sydney FC. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, writer and adventurer John Krakauer, author of Into the Wild and Into Thin Air, documentary maker Leanne Pooley on her latest work, The Girl on the Bridge, and the New Zealander fighting for the rights of domestic workers in Lebanon. It's slavery, she says. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, periods of rain with heavy falls, thunderstorms and downpours possible. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, occasional rain, possibly heavy in Coromandel, easing to a few showers tonight. Auckland to Wellington, including central high country, cloudy periods, patchy rain gradually clearing tonight or early tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, periods of rain with some heavy falls for Gisborne. Nelson, cloudy periods and a few showers about the ranges. For Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy, areas of drizzle mainly about and north of Christchurch. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, Otago and Southland, fine weather, however persistent, low cloud or fog in some valleys and basins. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. A new Super Rugby competition minus South Africa, Argentina and Japan, but including a Pacific team, will be launched next year. We have the details coming up, but we begin tonight with National's plans to crush congestion. Tunnels through mountain ranges and an additional Auckland Harbour bridge crossing are just some of the big ideas National has unveiled as part of a $31 billion infrastructure package. The ambitious ideas from the opposition were announced by new National Party leader Judith Collins in Auckland today. The speech was originally written for former leader Todd Muller, who quit before delivering it. Our political reporter Joe Moyer has the details.
National's infrastructure plan will see more than half the money spent in the Upper North Island. One of the most ambitious projects is a series of 4-lane expressways, including tunnels under the Brynderwyne and Kaimai ranges to connect Whangarei, Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga. The tunnels will be tolled, along with the additional Auckland Harbour crossing, which National is also proposing be a tunnel. It would be for both road, rail and new public transport that comes online. Judith Collins says half of New Zealand lives in the Upper North Island, and Aucklanders should feel like they live in one city.
One rough definition of a city is that it's a place you can get from one side to the other in an hour. At the moment, frankly, that's like a suburb. Another is that it's a place that the average time to get to work is 30 minutes. Under these definitions, Auckland is not a city at all.
Other projects announced today if National was elected to government include rail to Auckland Airport, new busways and an expanded Auckland ferry network. Money for the huge investment will come from the existing COVID Recovery Fund, plus Transport Agency borrowing and tunnel tolls. Ms Collins also wants the Resource Management Act gone. She says it will be replaced with 2 new pieces of law and that work will begin in the first 100 days of a national government.
It won't be reformed, it will go.
At the same time, it would repeal the Auckland regional fuel tax. But Ms Collins says unlike the regional fuel tax, people don't have to use the toll road and can use an existing route.
I travel down to Oportoki to visit my friends there. I tell you what, I go on the toll road. I happily pay for that toll because it saves me time, it saves me congestion, it saves me money. It's an excellent use of my time and money.
The projects announced today would use the fast-track RMA process, which National's transport spokesperson Chris Bishop is defending. He says Aucklanders just want progress and waiting for new legislation would take too long.
Frankly, they spent the last 3 years watching a government obsessed with a slow tram down Dominion Road and then becoming obsessed with a monorail down Dominion Road and down Queen Street.
But Finance Minister Grant Robertson says today's announcement sounds like the same legacy the current government inherited, which he described as a lot of promises, ghost roads and lots of press releases.
I keep thinking back to the nearly $6 billion hole left in ATAP, the Auckland Transport Alignment Plan that we inherited that we've had to fill up. And it just feels a bit like that to me. Some nice ideas, some big projects, but not necessarily a properly funded plan.
Mr Robertson has questions about how big the tolls would be and the costings for the various projects, which he says contradicts National's plans to reduce debt. He says the party's internal disarray in recent weeks isn't helping, and the opposition looks like it's scrambling to have policy ideas. The infrastructure improvements north of Auckland would fit nicely with any plan to move the ports of Auckland. National's finance spokesman Paul Goldsmith says it's for the Infrastructure Commission to investigate, and it doesn't necessarily mean Northport, New Zealand First's preference, is the right one.
We're up for the discussion. What we're not going to do is accept some scheme cooked up by Shane Jones as being the automatic answer.
While National may eventually land on the same page as New Zealand First over Northport, Winston Peters is poo-pooing today's announcements as a breathtaking plan on the never-never. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Joe Moyer.
And joining me now live from our Wellington studio is National Spokesperson for Infrastructure and Transport, Chris Bishop. Kia ora, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Kia ora, good to be here.
This is massive for both of your portfolios, huge projects, but a huge price tag. Similarly, how on earth are we going to afford all of this?
Well, look, it's an incredibly exciting day. Aucklanders have been waiting, decades for a program like this. It's a 20-year vision. I do want to stress that we've been asked to outline a pipeline of projects, and we've done exactly that. And yes, it is pricey, but we think it's worth it. And in terms of how we're paying for it, we're making quite a significant change to the way the New Zealand Transport Agency funds transport. The way I explain it is, at the moment, basically, it's called pay as you go. The NZTA takes the money in from fuel tax and road user charges, and then they pay it out. Now, that's not the way most businesses work, and it's not the way most households work. It's like, I describe it as like a household buying a house without a mortgage and with just 3 years of cash income, for example. So what we're doing is allowing the Transport Agency to borrow on its own balance sheet. They've got an asset base of about $26 billion a year in state highways, and they have revenue of $4 billion a year in fuel tax. And so we're going to allow them to borrow and pay back the debt basically over 20 or 30 years. It's like a household taking out a mortgage to buy a house, for example. That's how most ordinary businesses and households work, and so it's quite a significant change, and that provides quite a significant chunk of funding for the program we've announced today.
Don't we already have too many mortgages? How's this? What's the limit on this borrowing going to be?
Well, that will be investigated, but what we've said in the short term for the first 10 years will allow the Transport Agency to borrow $1 billion a year, so that provides for $10 billion. The advice I've received is that the Transport Agency could very easily borrow up to $25 billion in the next 5 years. We've decided the prudent thing to do is to space it out over 10 years for $10 billion. We're also using some of the government's COVID response recovery fund. We're also reprioritising some money from the National Land Transport Fund. We're using future capital allowances from the government and some unallocated cash from the government's own New Zealand Upgrade program as well. So people will be able to see online and publicly. It's a very credible costed package of projects, and one we think will really move the dial on congestion in Auckland and the Upper North Island. So
the reprioritising, are those projects being cut, and what's on the chopping block for that?
No, basically what we've done is we've taken the money that the current government has allocated to projects like light rail, which we don't support, and we're putting it back into the state highway activity class inside the National Land Transport Fund. This government cut $5 billion out of state highways when they came to office. We're restoring that funding, and in case anyone thinks we're not investing in public transport, we absolutely are. We're just doing it through direct Crown funding. We're investing in rail to Auckland Airport, for example, busways to the northwest of Auckland, out to the east, and down Dominion Road. So there's a massive investment in public transport. We're just not doing it through the National Land Transport Fund.
One of the projects which you seem pretty lukewarm on is the Sky Path. Are you saying that's off now?
Well, just saying we're pretty sceptical about it. A lot of the feedback I've had from Aucklanders is that the cost of it is just really extraordinary. A project that was, frankly pretty cheap to start, has really blown out to sort of $360 million. So people are pretty sceptical about whether or not it's worth the cost. So we're not saying we're absolutely committed to scrapping it. What we're keen to do is sit down with the experts, redesign it and try and get a cheaper option. Look, I think in time there does need to be a walking and cycling link over the harbour. That will be a real asset for Auckland, but $360 million, the feedback I've had from Aucklanders is that is a pretty hefty price tag.
See, I'm looking at feedback which is 78% of people in favour it, and 360 million of 31 billion doesn't seem so much. So what does a cheaper option look like, and when is that actually going to happen?
Well, we'll have a look at it. I mean, one option is that as we do our second harbour crossing, which will be a tunnel, both road and rail, so we'll finally get rail to North Shore, for example. One option is that as that's developed, you can retrofit the existing harbour bridge to potentially put walking and cycling across it, because of course you're basically adding hugely more capacity over to the shore with a tunnel, and you could potentially retrofit some of the existing harbour bridge. But that will come in time. So we're just going to work all that stuff through and talk to some of the experts about a cheaper option in the short term for the Skypath.
So that tunnel, that is a massive project, as are the tunnels through the Brindewin and the Kaimai ranges. But you're saying there won't be an RMA process for that. How do you do that? How do you get that balance right with the environment, people's homes, mana whenua? How do you do all that safely without the RMA?
Well, we're not saying there won't be a environmental process to assess those tunnels. Obviously there will be. You can't just ride roughshod it and do them. What we're saying is that the current RMA process is broken in terms of the amount of time it takes, the consultation required, and the length of time it takes to get projects going. So, of course, you need to consider things like what you just mentioned, mana whenua, and the impact on the environment. No one's disputing that. The question is just the process, and the current Resource Management Act is broken. What we're saying is actually very similar to what the current government's done with the 12 projects that they've listed in its recent fast-track bill, which is really an indictment on the current resource management process, and it indicates that they think the Act is broken. We think so too. And those tunnels are some way off. We're not saying they're going to happen straight away, of course. We've said for the second harbour crossing 2028, but the Brindewins and the Kaimais, that's into the 2030s. And as I say, we've scoped out a pipeline of projects over the next 20 years, and so there's plenty of time between now and 2031, 2032 to work through all the logistics and the implications of those projects.
Hey, Chris, we're running out of time, but today's speech was given by Judith Collins, but it was intended to be Todd Muller. Can I ask who you voted for earlier this week in terms of the leadership?
Oh, no, we don't reveal what happened in caucus.
Some people have. Are you comfortable revealing who you would have preferred to give that speech today?
No, look, I'm very comfortable with Judith as the leader of the National Party. There's a real enthusiasm, and just around the country, I'm just getting people so excited about her as leader, and I'm incredibly humbled and honoured to serve under her.
Your own electorate, Chris, was notably absent from all of these big transport announcements today. What's coming for Wellington?
Well, today was about the Upper North and Auckland, but I can reassure all of the people in Hutt South who are depending on me to deliver a great transport package for Wellington that good news is on the way.
What time? When are we expecting that?
Next 2 to 3 weeks.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for your time. That was Chris Bishop, National's Transport and Infrastructure spokesperson. It is 18 minutes past 5. I'm Nita Blake-Person in for Lisa Owen tonight, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback on anything you've heard tonight, be it National's transport plans or maybe the plans for the new rugby competition. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Well, the government has ruled out housing managed isolation and quarantine facilities in Queenstown and Invercargill. The minister responsible for managed isolation and quarantine, Megan Woods, who visited both locations yesterday, says Dunedin may still host returning New Zealanders in isolation. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has more.
In recent weeks, the government mooted the possibility of opening managed isolation and quarantine facilities in Dunedin and Queenstown. But after touring the lower south over the past 2 days, Megan Woods today confirmed neither Queenstown nor Invercargill are appropriate.
This is a combination of health capacity issues and the capacity that sits around the hotels, and also the ability for critical mass of number of facilities. So if you think about Queenstown and Invercargill, they probably represent one of those each.
Ms Woods says the decision to rule out Queenstown is not due to political pressure or opposition.
What became abundantly clear to us was actually the capacity of the broader health system around it to cope with anything that may or may not happen. Particularly some of the allied services that might be required around mental health. We heard very clearly that there were local concerns around that and the ability of the system to cope. That was the reason we made the decision.
She says the government is looking at 2 or 3 hotels in Dunedin, which may work.
One thing that I have been so impressed about with Dunedin is actually the very clear message that we've received from leaders here that Dunedin wants to play its part. This is about bringing New Zealanders home safely for their safety, but also to keep all of us safe. And Dunedin wants to be part of that.
Air Commodore Darren Webb says placing isolation facilities in Dunedin is about expanding capacity rather than acting as a hub for southerners returning to New Zealand.
It's not necessarily about where people will end up. Clearly, if we can align those two things, we'd seek to do so. But it's just to create the total volume requirement for all those coming home.
Mr Webb says Dunedin looks like a logical option for expanding the number of facilities.
90% of returning New Zealanders do travel into Auckland, so that is where, not surprisingly, we have the largest base of facilities. And so necessarily we have to move people from Auckland through to Christchurch, which we do now, which is now up to 6 facilities. And so Dunedin being a decent-sized airport, and then the health support is a logical alternative.
Queenstown Lakes Mayor Jim Bolt, who opposed hosting managed isolation in Queenstown, says the right decision has been made.
I think that's a sensible decision. We had expressed our concern that we don't have the medical facilities to cope with any sort of COVID-19 outbreak in the area, and so I think the Minister's decision recognises the sensibility of not isolating folk in Queenstown, and we're very pleased with that.
Southern DHB Chief Executive Chris Fleming says Queenstown was lacking in health services such as mental health or addiction that some returning may need access to.
I think it is important, the adage of a team of 5 million people, it's important that Southern steps up and supports the country in these challenges, and we just need to do it in the right place. We've had work underway for the last couple of weeks, knowing with the uncertainties of volumes and numbers that we might be called upon at any stage.
Dunedin Mayor Aaron Hawkins agrees Dunedin has to play its part.
I'm confident that Dunedin as a city, as a community, would be supportive of looking after people and playing our part in looking after them in the same way that the city's push to become a resettlement location for former refugees was community-led. Our city and our community put their hands up and said, we want to help. And I don't see why that attitude would be any different when it comes to looking after returning New Zealanders here.
A decision on opening isolation facilities in Dunedin and where they'll be hosted will be made soon, though authorities aren't expecting confirmation until August. In Dunedin, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
A new Super Rugby competition minus South Africa, Argentina and Japan, but including a Pacific team, is to be launched next year. The competition has emerged from the Aratipu report that New Zealand Rugby has carried out over the past 3 years, and which recommends establishing a competition involving the 5 current New Zealand franchises and a Pacific team, with the competition having 8 to 10 teams in total. That leaves room for 2 to 4 Australian teams, with NZR Chief Executive Mark Robinson putting out an invitation for existing Super Rugby franchises and other interested parties to apply. Our rugby reporter Joe Porter is with me now to discuss the competition. Good evening, Joe. How much of a surprise is this, the dropping of South Africa and the Argentinian teams from the whole competition?
Yeah, it has happened rather quickly, hasn't it? COVID seems to have accelerated a lot of sort of decisions around the world, but it is somewhat of a surprise, though not terribly shocking. Let's be honest, South Africa were already leaning towards taking their teams to Europe. 2 of their former Super Rugby teams already play in the Pro 14 competition in Europe. There's more money over there in terms of the time difference. The television rights work better for them to play in Europe. It makes more money for them in terms of revenue. So they were always looking like they were bailing out. Maybe New Zealand and Australia either saw the writing on the wall and decided to jump out first, or South Africa Africa had given them forewarning. I'm not sure exactly. It'll be interesting to find out in the wash of this who's jumped first in this instance. But yeah, South Africa always leaning towards having to join the Northern Hemisphere. New Zealand and Australia looking to protect their own interests down here. And COVID, like I've said, has really accelerated everyone's decision-making. So surprising but not shocking.
Certainly. So what's wrong with the current setup and the current competition?
Well, I guess it's lost the fans' imagination in some respects. There's too many games that don't mean anything. New Zealand teams have been fairly dominant over the last decade, and it's a little bit of an unfair format. You have conferences, South Africa and the Argentinian team play each other a lot, and you have some quite weak South African teams, and so a South African side can quite often end up at the top of the competition, therefore gaining a home final in the playoffs, but they haven't actually played any of the top New Zealand sides throughout the year because not every team plays each other. So it's a strange format where people feel like it's not quite a fair representation of who should be the actual champion. People miss the crunch derbies, they miss the matches, and look, who's going to get up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning New Zealand time to watch an Australian team play a South African team that they have no vested interest in, and I think that's where the problem lay.
Right. Hey, and this Pacific team is really exciting. There's been calls about this for a really long time. So where is this proposed team going to come from?
Yeah, fantastic. About time too. And I'm glad to see that that's a bit of a non-negotiable for New Zealand rugby after having having received so much good service from the Pacific Islands in the past in terms of players, support and all the rest of it. So great to see that. South Auckland looks like the base. Look, we've got Kanaloa Hawaii, who are the first professional rugby team to have been owned by Pacific Island owners. Jerome Kainoa, among 5 ex-All Blacks who own that team. They've just been given or granted permission to enter the Major League Rugby competition in North America next year. They're looking at creating their own separate Super Rugby team based in South Auckland to enter this new Super Rugby competition. So look, they're already asking for players and expressions of interest in terms of players and all kinds of people to join that academy base they're looking at setting up in South Auckland. So yeah, exciting times for them. But look, New Zealand Rugby, I believe, speaking to several parties about the possibility of creating this Pacific team. So it's not just Kanaloa Hawaii, who obviously they look like, first out the gate bet. There could be others out there as well, according to New Zealand Rugby. So exciting times to get that Pacific team here. There'll be a massive amount of interest in it.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks so much, Joe. That was our rugby reporter, Joe Reporter, with the latest on that new NZ Super Rugby franchise. COVID-19 continues to have Victoria firmly in its grip with another record-setting day of new cases. Today, the state has recorded 428 new infections and another 3 people have died. The situation has become a little more worrying in New South Wales too, with restrictions brought back on group gatherings. And Winston Peters has offered his 2 cents worth too. Here's our World Watch reporter, Annabelle Reid.
Another huge jump, 428 new cases of COVID-19 in the last day, 111 more than yesterday, the 12th day in a row of triple-digit increases.
We have not turned the corner here. Worse than that, 428 cases does not just represent that we've got increasing numbers day on day. There will be dozens of individuals who will require hospitalisation.
Victoria's Chief Health Officer Brett Sutton says the lockdown in place in Melbourne may not have an impact on numbers for 2 weeks. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, believes it's doing its job.
That ring around Melbourne and Mitchell Shire is working in terms of reducing the spread of this virus into regional Victoria, but it can change. It can change if people don't follow the rules. It can change if people have symptoms and go about their business as if they didn't. It can certainly change if people pretend this is over because they really want it to be.
Some Victorians have been taking their mandated daily exercise a bit far, with a couple of people having taken a 200-kilometre round trip in recent days. The Premier's given them a clear message.
A day trip is not the same as daily exercise. It's a very different thing, and it is not on.
There have been 3,400 cases in the state since the middle of June, and the heat is coming on Daniel Andrews over how the fresh outbreaks came about. An independent inquiry is looking into the state government's decision to deploy private security contractors to manage the hotel quarantine, and the subsequent reports the guards slept with quarantiners before returning to their homes in Melbourne's suburbs. Prime Minister Scott Morrison told Channel 9 he'll wait for the findings before passing judgment.
But right now, all my focus on is supporting people in Victoria, supporting Melburnians in particular, and ensuring that we're giving them all the support they need for the Victorian Government and Premier Andrews to be able to get on top of this, and he has our full support to do that.
Also speaking to Channel 9, the Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, who called the situation in Victoria a disaster.
It's awfully frustrating, I can imagine, and I'm looking at the premiers of the states in Australia, at Scott Morrison, and I feel a great sort of regret that looseness allowed this thing to get out of control, in my view, in Australia.
New South Wales is moving to contain its outbreak of cases, which stemmed from an infected man and his colleagues visiting a pub in southwest Sydney. The state's Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, says groups at restaurants and clubs will now be limited to 10, weddings will be capped at 150, and dancing is totally forbidden.
What we need to do in New South Wales is minimise the risk of those activities which we know super spread the virus, those activities indoors which we know act as a catalyst.
There are 42 cases linked to the outbreak at the Crossroads Hotel, and the Premier says New South Wales is in a state of high alert.
We're doing okay, but we're very concerned. We're worried about any seeding that may have happened from Victoria even a month or so ago that has been bubbling along beneath the surface.
So while millions of Victorians are being told to stay at home and those in New South Wales having caps on their gatherings, Winston Peters still has eyes for a trans-Tasman bubble. He told Channel 9 he's spoken to Tasmania's Premier and urged him to get permission from Scott Morrison to create a bubble with New Zealand.
I said to him, Peter, you're set to go. Tasmania's got a record that's better than New Zealand. You need to talk to your Premier in Canberra and get clearance because it's holding you back. We used to fly between our two countries and state in the 1990s. We could do it again.
As far as the problem state goes, though,
I do hope you get on top of things in Melbourne. It's a great city, it's a great state, but boy, what can we say? If we can help, give us a shout.
Good on you. Yeah. Thanks, Winston.
For Checkpoint, Annabelle Reid.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Brazil now has 2 million cases of coronavirus. Hundreds marched to protest a landfill plan for Dome Valley north of Auckland. And Rodney the cat is found alive and well weeks after he was dumped 13 kilometres from the ITM store in Martin, where he made his home for 10 years. We would love your feedback on National's $31 billion plan to crush congestion, on New Zealand's rugby plans for a new competition including players from the Pacific, or if you're listening in Northland and have been impacted by that bad weather today. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susana Leotawa with the headlines.
National spokesperson for infrastructure and transport says Aucklanders have been waiting decades for new investment in transport and that the current RMA process is broken. The party has announced a $31 billion infrastructure package, including tunnels through mountain ranges and an expansion of the Auckland ferry network, if elected. Chris Bishop told Checkpoint it would allow the transport agency to borrow the money and repay it, like a mortgage. The Southern District Health Board says Queenstown is lacking in essential services that returning New Zealanders may need. The DHB is welcoming the government's decision to rule out Queenstown and Invercargill as a location for managing isolation facilities, labelling them unsuitable. A blast of wet weather has cut power to hundreds of properties in Northland this afternoon, and heavy rain and thunderstorms have caused flash flooding, slips and brought down trees across the far north. 650 customers on the Koutou Peninsula have been without power since around 4 o'clock. A judge has called the fact police put out a police media release clearing an officer of wrongdoing months after he shot a man dead in Waitara prejudicial in terms of a future trial. Senior Constable Keith Abbott was acquitted of murder in 2002, 2 years after shooting dead Stephen Wallace. The family has now taken a civil claim against the police. Victoria's coronavirus cases continue to grow, with 428 new infections reported today, another record daily high. 3 more people have died, bringing the Australian state's death toll to 32. A house in Tūrangi has been destroyed by a fire this afternoon. Emergency services were called to the scene at Mawake Place at about 3 o'clock, but the building was already well alight. No one was injured. A new Super Rugby competition will be launched next year, minus South Africa, Argentina and Japan, but including a Pacific team. The head of New Zealand Rugby is seeking expressions of interest from existing Super Rugby franchises and other parties. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. And we are turning to business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Kia ora, Nicholas. Thanks for joining us. The manufacturing industry appears to be booming. Can you take us through some of those numbers?
So the BNZ has released its latest monthly Business New Zealand Performance of Manufacturing Index for June, and it shows activity is back well into expansion territory, up to 56.3 points. So to put that in perspective, anything above 50 indicates growth, anything below signals contraction. So what we're seeing for June is a huge gain on where the industry was in May and April, where activity really slumped to levels lower than what we saw during the GFC. So this expansion has been driven by a surge in new orders, which is driving production and deliveries. And earlier today I spoke to BNZ senior economist. He says that the surge in activity is really making up for that lost ground we had because of lockdown. What he said was, I thought was quite nice, was we've made a small step forward after a giant leap backwards. So, however, he says the employment index, which is still below 50, paints a more sobering picture of where manufacturing really is at the moment. It shows really that people are not really getting hired. So this is something that we kind of have to really keep an eye on going forward to see, as production activity goes up, are we going to start seeing more and more people being hired in the sector? But to sort of finish round this story out on a bit of a bright spot, our index is actually is in a lot stronger position compared with the countries that we usually measure ourselves against. So that's like Australia, the US and the UK. And this is a real turnaround given our index was tracking a lot lower than these countries over lockdown. So and really it's just reflecting that we went into lockdown earlier, we've come out sooner, we've got the loosest restrictions in the world, and businesses are back up manufacturing stuff again.
Great, but it doesn't look so good in this next one. A new survey's painted a worrying picture about people's finances as they near retirement. So what's happening there?
Yeah, there were some worrying signs coming out of the survey conducted by a financial services company called National Capital. So they surveyed 1,000 people who were 10 to 20 years away from retirement. So we're talking people in their late 40s, late 50s. And what they found was 2/3 thought that they weren't in the financial position they wanted to be in with retirement coming on. And about half of those were worried about the future. But despite their anxiety, only 1/5 had said that saving was a real priority at the moment. It's just something that's not always at the forefront of our minds. And to top it all off, 14%. Only 14% had sought financial advice on how they can prepare for the future better. So I think you can sort of look at these findings in two ways. It's sort of saying a couple of things or trends that have emerged. And I think on one hand it says, what really speaks to the fact that as a country we have a really poor overall track record when it comes to financial literacy. I don't know about you, but when I was at school, getting taught about money, how to save it, how to use it, what it even is, something we weren't really educated in.
Not me either.
No. And I think another thing that's probably worth mentioning with regard to this is that it's worth acknowledging that a lot of people right now are under a lot of real financial pressure. So, we are in the middle of a recession, really. So when it comes to planning and retirement and putting money away each week, for some people, that's a real luxury, It's a privilege to be able to actually be in a position where you can afford to put money away each week.
Absolutely, yeah.
So should we get to the markets?
Yeah, what's been happening there?
So the NZX Top 50 closed up 0.2% by 79 points to 11,584. ASX 200 down slightly, about 0.1%. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 65.4 US cents, 93.7 Australian and 52.1 British pence. And taking a quick look around the global markets, Asian shares eked out some small gains, US stocks futures bounced back, and there's just a general feeling, more hopes that government spending around the globe will start to suppress concerns about rising coronavirus cases.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Nicholas. That was our business reporter, Nicholas Poynton. Well, hundreds of opponents to a massive landfill earmarked for Auckland's Dome Valley marched to the centre of the city today to present a petition to Mayor Phil Goff. If a resource consent by Waste Management is accepted, it will be Auckland's largest rubbish dump. The hikoi saw local iwi walk side by side with Dome Valley residents all the way down Queen Street and into Aotea Square, but when they arrived, the mayor was nowhere to be seen. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui and video journalist Dan Cook were there.
It wasn't just representatives from Ngāti Whātua or the Dome Valley here today. Others travelled from as far as Kirikiri and Dargaville to show their support. The proposed rubbish dump will be situated 70 kilometres north of the city, right next to the Kaipara and Hōtio rivers. Dame Naida Glavish says the well-being of her mokopuna are on the line.
These are my greats, and I don't want them inheriting the pollution and the abuse of the environment from Tāmaki Makaurau. I grew up on the shores of the Kaipara Harbour. From that Hōtio River runs a little creek called Waikiri. That's where we used to bathe when I was a child. And that runs right in front of my marae, Puatahi. And it's under threat.
Ngāti Whātua consider the Kaipara Moana an ancestral river where generations of whānau have fished for kai, bathed and swam. Dave Sawyer, who lives near the river, understands its significance, and he's overwhelmed to see so many people just as passionate as him to protect it.
Amazing. I mean, we've got iwi, all different iwis here. You know, we've got people like myself who have made New Zealand our home. We've got European Kiwis coming through. Fantastic. It's a whole community here. I've got my 9-year-old right there. It's his future. He's going to be drinking the water that we're going to poison. It's his children that are going to drink the water that we're poisoning.
What started out as a tiny community-led Facebook page 2 years ago called Fight the Tip has become its own massive movement. And as you can probably hear behind me, demands to stop the tip aren't going away anytime soon. What are your biggest concerns about this rubbish dump being put up?
Rubbish. That's my biggest concern, is the rubbish, dumping of rubbish into our river. And then it'll flow into our harbour.
The Kaipara is one of the largest, it is the largest harbour in the southern hemisphere, and it's responsible for 90% of the commercial snapper catch, trevally, oysters, mullet, flounder, scallops, orca.
If there's one thing you want the Auckland Mayor to know, what would that one thing be?
Guys? To stop polluting. Stop. Just stop. Just find somewhere else to put it.
The Auckland Council notified a resource consent application for the dump site by Chinese-owned company Waste Management the day before the country moved into lockdown. Ngāti Manuhiri spokesperson Mikaira Muru says his people have since written submissions to the council and won't be giving up without a fight.
You know, it's one thing to have the power in the pen of the Crown. It's another thing to have the power of the people behind you. And so what's happening today is we've got the people here today knocking on the door of the council to tell the council that, you know what, we want to protect our environment. We want to stop the paru going into the Kaipara.
That message made loud and clear today as protesters snaked their way through the city, chanting and waving signs. The only problem was when they finally arrived at Aotea Square, Phil Goff was nowhere to be seen, making a last-minute no-show. His deputy, Bill Cashmore, instead accepting the petition on his behalf.
I'm here today to accept this petition on behalf of Auckland Council. I'm here to tell you that we are listening and we hear you.
Oh, stop it! Stop it!
We know you feel strongly about this and we will hear your concerns.
Stop it!
In terms of process, and this is important, Auckland Council is required, as all councils are, by the Resource Management Act to process every application we receive from start to finish. There is nothing in the RMA that would allow this council or any other to stop this process.
Auckland Council will be accepting public submissions on the resource consent until July 31st. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
It is 16 minutes to 6. I'm Nita Blake-Person in for Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We would love to hear from you if you've got some feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The US has recorded its biggest daily increase in new coronavirus infections since the start of the pandemic. It's reported just over 75,000 cases in the last 24 hours. There are only 2 states where nobody has died from COVID-19 in the past week. They are Alaska and Vermont. The rest are quite a different story, as CNN's Nick Watt reports.
Texas, now, 6 months into this pandemic. Refrigerated trailers deployed to store the dead in Dallas, San Antonio, and down near the border. Morgues are filling up.
I'm pleading with everybody here in our neck of the woods, in our community. I need everybody to help us and do their part.
A hotel in Laredo is being converted into a makeshift hospital, and in Corpus Christi,
we were doing fantastic at the end of May. We have just absolutely skyrocketed after Memorial Day.
Mid-May, the county was logging maybe a handful of new cases every day. Yesterday, more than 1,000. Similar situation over in Miami, where hospitals are now at 95% capacity.
We're at the highest level of ventilators that we've seen through this pandemic, which obviously is worrisome because that's an indication of the death rate that will increase most likely over the next couple of weeks.
39 states are now heading in the wrong direction, with average case counts rising. In only Delaware and Maine are those numbers falling, and those 2 states home to less than 1% of the US population. Today, Target and CVS joined the growing list of retailers that will require masks in stores nationwide. Arkansas's governor just reversed course, now requiring masks in public. And Tulsa's mayor just signed a mask order, dutifully wearing one himself. Mask mandates now in at least 39 states, but not Georgia, where the governor recently returned from a wear a mask tour of his state, just banned local municipalities from making them mandatory. Savannah's mayor tweeted, "Governor Kemp does not give a damn about us."
The fact that we are arguing about masking, I don't understand that in the middle of a pandemic.
Example, the Utah County Commission meeting about masks in schools.
We are supposed to be physically distancing, wearing masks, and so...
The president kind of agrees with those boos. He wants schools open before the election.
We're going to be putting a lot of pressure on open your schools in the fall.
Not one of the 20 largest districts in the country has committed to in-person teaching. But the state of Florida says they're ready to open, even as Miami's mayor pleads for federal guidance to manage the outbreak in what is arguably now our nation's epicenter.
Meanwhile, Brazil now has 2 million cases of coronavirus. It's the worst hit country after the US, and more than 76,000 people have died. The president, who this week again tested positive for the virus, remains in isolation in the presidential palace, but is still pressing for the country to reopen and return to normality. The BBC's Katie Watson reports from a hospital in Sao Paulo.
We lost a patient, 37 years old.
Dr. Fernanda Gulinelli walks me through the intensive care unit of Emílio Ribas. This is one of Brazil's top infectious diseases hospitals. When the pandemic hit, they placed their patients in other institutions and started catering entirely to those with COVID-19. It doesn't look like a typically packed public hospital. Every patient in this unit is in isolation, and between the room itself and the ward is a chamber with a sink where the doctors put on their gowns and masks before entering.
They're coming in worse situation. Sometimes you just can't do anything anymore. It's very hard because we lose people, sometimes more than one of a family.
It's a brutal job, says Dr. Fernanda, who's on shift with her husband, Dr. André, also an infectious diseases specialist. They enter a room to check on a patient. You can see him heaving as he tries to breathe. He's lost the use of a lung, and they're unsure whether he'll survive. Every day she has his 9-year-old daughter on the phone.
We have to deal with the family pain. They're not here for them when they're dying. We're trying to do our best, but sometimes it's not enough.
4 months in, they're exhausted, and there's no end in sight.
I feel safe here, more than I'm outside.
Really?
Really?
You feel safer than outside? Because of people not distancing, people not taking care.
I don't go to...
It's a comment that reveals a great deal about what's happening in Brazil at the moment. President Bolsonaro has shunned social distancing and refused to wear masks, despite them being mandatory. The death toll is huge, yet shops, malls and restaurants are reopening. People here say it sends the wrong message. Dr. Jamal Suleiman is another of the doctors in the team.
He is irresponsible. He is a person without empathy. He is incompetent. We have every day 4 airplanes crashing. And he said, it's not my problem. So, it's my problem?
It's hard for you.
Yeah.
The BBC's Katie Watson with that report. The All Whites are set to play world number 1 Belgium in a men's football friendly in October. New Zealand Football has confirmed it has provisional plans to take on the Red Devils in Brussels on October 9th. The Belgian team is likely to include some of the world's top players who helped them to 3rd place in the 2018 World Cup. Barry Guy has this report.
Curls it in. Oh, and a touch in! New Zealand remarkably break the deadlock. Shane Smelts. Another remarkable story unfolding here.
A friendly against Belgium would certainly rank alongside playing Italy or Brazil at a World Cup finals or Germany at a Confederations Cup. The New Zealand men have never played the number 1 ranked side in the world before, so why would the Belgians want to play us, a side ranked 121 places below them? New Zealand Football CEO Andrew Pragnell says our reputation is a lot higher than the team's ranking suggests.
We'd all acknowledge that our ability is a lot higher than the ranking shows, and I think then the relationships help as well. So we played Ireland last year, who are obviously a top quality side, and scored the first goal and were very respectable on the field. So I think there's some awareness of that also.
Pragnell says the likes of Chris Wood, Winston Reid and Sarpreet Singh playing in Europe has helped New Zealand football's profile. There is also an obvious link between the two coaches. Danny Hay used to play alongside Roberto Martinez in England 20 years ago. Hay acknowledges how tough it'll be against a side containing some of the best players in the world.
So whether they play the likes of Hazard, Lukaku, De Bruyne, we know that it's going to be a real challenge because they've got a huge amount of depth. They've got a world-class coach, as we all know, and so it's going to be a real challenge for us.
Hay will probably have to select a side from the players based in Europe. Former All Whites defender Ben Sigmund was a part of the 2010 World Cup squad that drew with Paraguay, Slovakia and Italy. They played some big names back then, but Sigmund says the quality of the Belgium team at the moment is unreal.
Players like Eden Hazard, right, who's I suppose one of the top players in the world. You've got Kevin De Bruyne again. These guys would be in your world 11. It just goes on and on. Their goalkeeper, I think they've got a choice of about 3 different world-class goalkeepers. Their squad is just riddled with quality players.
However, confirmation of the fixture is still some way off. The All Whites were scheduled to play Oceania World Cup qualifying games in October, but they're now likely to be shifted to 2021. The obvious roadblock is COVID-19, and Andrew Pragnell says that is a major hurdle.
So we need to temper those expectations with reality that it's all provisional on travel and health and safety requirements being met. So we're really excited. We realise that there's a chance this could be cancelled by either party. But I think in the COVID world, you just have to keep making plans. And the key here was not missing out on a real opportunity.
Pragnell says all going well, they'll try and organise a second game while in Europe. For Checkpoint, Barry Guy.
Heavy rain and thunderstorms are wreaking havoc in the far north, causing flooding, slips and bringing down trees. The Far North District Council says numerous roads have been hit with flash flooding, including state highways. It says contractors had responded to more than 50 call-outs by late afternoon and is urging drivers to check road information before travelling. Our reporter Katie Doyle has just got off the phone to Kawakawa RSA President Hector Davies, who can see floodwaters rising in the town.
Oh, well, it's really wet. It's been persistently raining for the last 24 hours at least. We're just starting to get thunder and lightning as well. It did ease off for an hour or so, but pretty much surrounding the whole community of Kawakawa where I live is the floodwaters are rising and rising as we speak. So it's going to be a hard night for a lot of people.
Are people hunkering down at the moment?
Oh, yeah, well they are. Obviously, there's certain areas that are sort of known to flood, and those people generally know their own areas to sort of stay home, otherwise they won't be able to get back. So, yeah, no, it's pretty tough for a lot of people.
And if you look outside at the moment, I mean, how heavy is the rain? Do you think it'll be causing any damage?
Well, it is heavy. Obviously, maybe houses or buildings that may spring the odd leak or so here or there. It's not that windy. Normally the wind is the thing that creates the biggest problems by blowing trees over and so on and so on. But obviously if the floodwaters keep getting higher and higher, then obviously that damages, there's trees and different things that may be in paddocks that get moved around and damage fences and so on and so on. So, yeah, you just don't know.
And do you have any rivers around you that might burst their banks?
Oh, yes, they've already burst their banks. You can see, I'm looking down from the RSA to the township, and the shops down the bottom of the township are already starting to get flooded.
And how high do you reckon the floodwaters would be?
Oh, well, it depends where you measure it, of course, but I think it's going to be very high. This keeps going, and of course, a lot of the rain is, we receive a lot of water that'll come down the valley, and it can take a day to 2 days to get here. So if it keeps raining, it's going to be pretty high.
That was Kawakawa RSA President Hector Davies speaking to our reporter Katie Doyle just a few minutes ago. Now, we are getting a lot of feedback coming in about National's infrastructure plans, the $31 billion plan they announced today. So we'll go to that now. This person's emailed in from Hamilton. Whoopee, I thought, $31 billion on infrastructure. A national government would be upgrading those decaying schools and hospitals, working with communities to upgrade their water systems. In other words, do those things that the previous national government let run down. But no, $31 billion for more roads, and wait for it, underground roads, all paid for on the never, never, of course. What a backward-looking, barren policy. To others coming in on the text, scrapping or even re-evaluating the Skypath is a joke. A walking cycling option was considered and scrapped when the bridge was first built. We all know that was a big mistake and are still trying to fix it. That's why it's expensive and will just get more expensive the longer we wait. Talking about retrofitting some of the existing bridge once the new tunnel crossing it is built is just insulting. What a joke. National. Quite a few scathing ones. National promised 10 new bridges in Northland. One has been built. National doesn't care about people, they care about things. Another one here, it's not just the cost of doing the Skypath, it's the continued cost of not doing it, 60 years late now. And lastly, Bishop talking about what National will do in 2028. The way people are deserting the party, will they still be around then? If you have any other thoughts, please feel free to get in touch. We are on the text 2101, tweet checkpoint@RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Overseas now, Captain Tom Moore, who raised millions of dollars for UK charities, will travel to Windsor Castle later tonight to be knighted by the Queen. The 100-year-old gained international fame when he made 100 trips around his backyard with a walking frame to raise money during the pandemic. Royal honours were put on hold during the outbreak, however. The Queen, who has been staying at the Windsor Castle during the lockdown, will carry out this special engagement in person. The BBC's Sarah Campbell reports.
Happy birthday to you.
It started as a family challenge. Walk 100 lengths of the garden to mark a 100th birthday, and in the process, raise £1,000 for NHS charities. The UK and much of the world was in lockdown at the time, and as the former army captain's story spread, it became clear that his understated manner and wise words were what people needed to hear. The donations kept coming and coming. By the time he celebrated his birthday, the total had topped £30 million. He received an estimated 140,000 cards from around the world, an RAF flypast, and it was subsequently announced, a knighthood. His response was typically modest.
I'm still Tom Moore. I think Sir Thomas sounds very nice, but inside I haven't changed. Nothing's changed inside.
Today, he and his family will travel to the quadrangle inside Windsor Castle, where the Queen's birthday parade was held last month. All investitures have been on hold during the pandemic, but for Captain Sir Tom, the Queen has made an exception. I could never have imagined this would happen to me, he tweeted earlier this week. It is such a huge honour, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting Her Majesty the Queen. An inspiration to many thousands of people around the world, his will be an exceptional ceremony for an extraordinary man.
The BBC's Sarah Campbell with that story. Now, before the news at 6, we have time for a little bit more feedback. OMG, more roads. Have they got nothing else? 4-lane highway from one end of Auckland to the other. Wow, bring on ugly cities. How can voters believe National could deliver their infrastructure ideas when their experience has left? There is infighting and no teamwork. Their leadership is temporary and they continually criticise borrowing. And lastly, National created the traffic congestion mess, the pressure on our health and education systems, and countless other problems with their unbridled rockstar economy, immigration rates, without any foresight and infrastructure planning. Now they're proposing to wave their magic wands and fix the mess they created. Yeah, right. If you have any alternative views on National's $31 billion plans, we would love to hear from you. Now, after 6 tonight, a perfect ending to the mysterious case of Martin's missing Moggy. Rodney the cat was adopted by the North Island town's ITM store a few years back and became a hit with customers. Last month, Rodney disappeared, but after a concerned customer started digging around, it was revealed a store manager had dumped the cat in the countryside. But this evening, the Martin Moggy's Facebook page has revealed Rodney has been found on a local farm earlier this week. We will bring you all of those details about the Rodney the cat's fate after the 6 o'clock news with Susanna.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susanna Leata tēnei. The National Party has eyes on a cheaper option for a pedestrian path across Auckland's Harbour Bridge. The opposition has unveiled a $31 billion infrastructure package if it wins the election, with more than half the money earmarked for transport projects in the Upper North Island. National's transport spokesperson Chris Bishop told Checkpoint he's sceptical about the price tag the government's working with for a footbridge across the Waitemata Harbour.
What we're keen to do is sit down with the experts, redesign it and try and get a cheaper option. Look, you know, I think in time there does need to be a walking and cycling link over the harbour. That will be a real asset for Auckland, but $360 million, the feedback I've had from Aucklanders is that is a pretty hefty price tag.
The National Party's other big ticket items include tunnels under the Brynderwen and Kaimai mountain ranges to connect Whangarei, Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga, rail to Auckland Airport and new busways. But the Finance Minister says there are some big holes in National's $31 billion infrastructure plan that need answers. Grant Robertson says it sounds like the same legacy his government inherited.
I keep thinking back to the nearly $6 billion hole left in ATAP, the Auckland Transport Alignment Plan that we inherited that we've had to fill up. And it just feels a bit like that to me. Some nice ideas, some big projects, but not necessarily a properly funded plan.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson. Parts of the far north have had a month's worth of rain in less than a day. Heavy rain and thunderstorms have been lashing the region, flooding roads and causing slips. Met Service says Kerikeri and Kaikohe have both had about 140 millimetres of rain today. Forecaster Jared Ballum says it's been a pretty big dumping of rain.
We've seen some thunderstorm lightning showing up in our detection systems there. And even just in recent while, we've had 24 millimetres falling just up the road from Whangarei in a thunderstorm.
The storm has also cut power to hundreds of properties. North Power says 650 customers on the Koutou Peninsula have been without power since about 4 o'clock. The US has recorded its biggest daily increase in new coronavirus infections since the start of the pandemic. It's reported just over 75,000 cases in the last 24 hours. Jagruti Dave reports from Washington.
Cases have skyrocketed in more than 30 states in the last week. Health officials are worried that hospitals might reach capacity and there could be a shortage of equipment. The governor of Arkansas joined the growing number of state leaders to issue a mandate on masks. But another Republican governor, Brian Kemp in Georgia, has filed a lawsuit against Atlanta's mayor for her directive on face coverings, which opposes the governor's executive order banning local officials from mandating masks. And despite surging infections, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany reiterated the Trump administration's push for schools to reopen, saying the science should not stand in the way of this.
Jagruti Dave with that report. The Mayor of Queenstown says a government decision to rule out using the resort's hotels for managed isolation is sensible. The Minister responsible for isolation and quarantine facilities, Megan Woods, visited the resort and Invercargill yesterday and today confirmed neither town would be appropriate for isolation. Jim Bolt says the district's limited health facilities and small regional hospital couldn't cope with any kind of COVID-19 outbreak. He says it makes sense to put people in managed isolation or quarantine in places like Dunedin. A Manukau councillor says it's essential the South Auckland community keeps its public services open. Auckland Council passed its emergency budget yesterday, agreeing to a rates rise of 3.5%, slashing spending and selling off assets. City coffers are down $750 million due to COVID-19 and the region's ongoing drought. Alf Filipina says people are worried about pools, libraries and parks, but the rates increase means those essential services are safeguarded.
I just hope that our community end up really supporting what's been done. I know there'll be a lot that won't, but I think there'll be also some people, as our 21 local boards indicated, that they supported 3.5.
Manukau councillor Alf Filipina. In central Otago, crews have got the highway into Cromwell open to 2 lanes in time for the weekend. State Highway 8 near Deadman's Point Bridge has been reduced to 1 lane for much of the week due to a slip on the hill above the road. It's coming up to 6:05. Rugby Australia has offered a muted response. New Zealand Rugby asking teams to sign up a new look franchise competition next year. A 3-month review has concluded Super Rugby should be replaced by a new competition featuring all 5 existing New Zealand franchises and a Pacific team with 8 to 10 teams all up. That leaves room for 2 to 4 Australian teams and removes any involvement of teams from South Africa, Argentina and Japan. New Zealand Rugby's chief executive says expressions of interest will be sought next week from the current Australian teams and other interested parties. Rugby Australia has put out a statement acknowledging New Zealand's plan but gave no indication of whether it would support it. Second place on the netball's ANZ Premiership ladder is up for grabs tonight when the 2 Auckland-based sides, the Northern Mystics and the Northern Stars, square off. The Mystics are currently second with 4 wins from 6 games and can put a buffer between themselves and the Stars, who sit third, just a point behind but having played 1 more game. And football's A-League competition resumes tonight after a 4-month hiatus due to COVID-19, with the third-placed Wellington Phoenix playing top of the table, Sydney. That's the news.
On Sunday morning, do you need to be changing your internet browser? There are new kids on the block if you don't have a Chrome to go to. Dr. Kate Grigorovich taking your questions about how to live longer. Her new book is Staying Alive. Wellington's international movie actor Graham McTavish on his new exploration of Scotland. And Christina Lamb on why the Countess of Wessex is the new star of the royal family. What do sharks eat? We know now. And what they found in the back of an SS officer's armchair. Sunday morning starts at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland periods of rain with heavy falls, thunderstorms and downpours possible. Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, occasional rain, possibly heavy in Coromandel, easing to a few showers tonight. Auckland to Wellington, including central high country, cloudy periods. Patchy rain gradually clearing tonight or early tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waitatapa periods of rain with some heavy falls for Gisborne. Nelson, cloudy periods and a few showers about the ranges. Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly cloudy. Areas of drizzle mainly about north of Christchurch. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland, Otago and Southland, fine weather. However, persistent low cloud or fog in some valleys and basins. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and a few showers. RNZ National, 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna. New Zealand Rugby is backing the inclusion of a Pacifica team in a revamped Super Rugby competition that leaves South Africa, Argentina and Japan on the sidelines. Following a 3-month-long review, the Aratipu report has recommended New Zealand Rugby establish a new competition in 2021. Chief Executive Mark Robinson says ideally 8 to 10 teams will take part. New Zealand's 5 current Super Rugby franchises have priority, but Robinson says he is open to which other teams will fill the remaining spots.
We believe Pacifica have the potential to have a role in this competition. There are several parties who have registered interest already, and we've had a little bit of dialogue with it. We'll begin dialogue with those entities in more detail from next week. Australia is also a party that we're interested in working with, and we've had some obviously some preliminary discussions there too. We're very conscious of any teams coming into the competition that they are highly competitive, that they're financially viable, and that they bring value that can attract fans and maintain interest in the competition.
Mark Robinson says by New Zealand Rugby leading the conversation on a reboot of Super Rugby, the competition will benefit New Zealand sides.
Got to be very positive and proactive in this space now that we've landed where we're at. So absolutely, we see it as a critical time these next 6 months or so at a whole range of levels, obviously around the professional competition, but right around the game in New Zealand, we see opportunities to take stock and look at the ways that we can do things differently.
The new competition ends a 25-year partnership with South Africa, but Robinson says there will still be links between the nations for international matches.
We remain close allies with South Africa, Australia and Argentina, and we remain working very, very closely with SANZAAR at present around a whole range of different things for Southern Hemisphere rugby.
That was NZ Rugby CEO Mark Robinson. Expressions of interest to join the competition will be open next week and need to be with New Zealand Rugby by the end of August. Well, it was a big morning for the National Party as its new leader, Judith Collins, announced an infrastructure spend worth more than $30 billion. 4-lane expressways in the Upper North Island headlined the announcement. The opposition also wants to build tunnels underneath the Brynderwyne and Kaimai ranges. It's got the nod of approval from Whangarei Mayor Cheryl Mai, but Auckland Mayor Phil Goff is less impressed. Katie Doyle reports.
It's being touted as the fix to what's described as New Zealand's congestion crisis. A $31 billion transport infrastructure investment announced today by the National Party.
Let's get on to this biggest infrastructure package in New Zealand's history. Oh, it's so much fun to be announcing this. It will transform our country. It will transform the Upper North Island.
And the Upper North Island wants the big winner today. About $17 billion set aside for projects in the region, including 4-lane expressways between Whangarei, Auckland, Hamilton and Tauranga. It's got the seal of approval from Whangarei Mayor Cheryl Mai.
Northland leaders are always thrilled when options are put forward for investment into our region. So we welcome the news and look forward to seeing the ongoing investment into infrastructure in our region.
Ms Mai says Northland has trailed desperately behind other regions for years when it comes to transport infrastructure.
The upgrades to the state highway, but also to rail infrastructure, it really opens it up, the economic opportunities, and also through the visitor sector as well. New Zealanders are wanting to explore their own country, and on safe and resilient roads is essential.
Auckland will also be getting a slice of the pie. National says it will complete the city's rapid transit network, including a rail line to the airport and new busways. However, new leader Judith Collins says the party wants to scrap the $360 million biking and pedestrian path across the bridge. Light rail's off National's agenda too.
National believes light rail will be to the 2020s what monorails were in the 1980s. See, it does actually pay to remember. We do support completing Auckland's existing train and bus system.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff wouldn't speak to RNZ today, but in a statement that has been voiced, said he welcomed any investment into the city's transport routes. But Mr Goff was critical of National's plan to scrap the regional fuel tax.
If the regional fuel tax, which with matching subsidies totals $4.3 billion of investment in Auckland's transport system, is scrapped, it needs to be replaced with a guaranteed funding source that is at least equal in amount. We need light rail because we are expecting bus congestion on our main roads like Dominion Road in the next 5 to 6 years, so we need something that can carry people efficiently.
National has also earmarked $14 billion for projects in the south, but none of those have been announced yet. Queenstown Mayor Jim Bolt says he'll be eagerly awaiting those details.
I think what National have indicated is a confirmation of the need to continue with infrastructure spend. Clearly they've put some thought into what's required in the north, less so for the rest of the country. And I very much look forward to seeing further detail once it's released.
Mr Bolt says he'll be delighted if the shovel-ready projects his council have pitched to the current government are confirmed by whoever wins the election. He says they would likely cost in the region of about $200 million.
Well, we've already had confirmation of our Inner Links roading project, the upgrade of downtown Queenstown. We're looking for some support for an upgrade of the Wanaka waterfront area, Cadrona wastewater scheme, and a major spend on our events centre.
So while the Upper North Island celebrates the announcement, the South may have to wait a little longer. For Checkpoint, Katie Doyle.
Almost 250 people lost their jobs when Bauer Media announced it was closing the book on its New Zealand titles during the lockdown. But now some have been revived, with the first set to land in Air New Zealand's seat pockets from next week and the rest on New Zealand shelves and letterboxes from September. Sydney-based Mercury Capital has taken ownership of several magazines and will resume publication immediately, whilst creating 40 new editorial and advertising roles. The business will continue to trade under the Bauer name here in Australia, whilst a rebrand is underway. Bauer Australia's New Zealand Chief Executive Brendan Hill.
Yeah, we're delighted to announce that the publications are returning. So the titles are Australian Women's Weekly New Zealand edition and Women's Day New Zealand edition, which have been operating post the restrictions, but with not as much New Zealand content as we'd like. So we'll re-establish those editorial teams and get them back to what they were prior. Then also reinstating New Zealand Listener, Your Home and Garden, and Cura magazines that we publish on behalf of Air New Zealand, which I think's already been announced. So, yeah, it's a good stable of magazines, and it will be great to bring them back.
Great. So, and are those all of the publications you'll be bringing back? Have any not made the cut to come back?
No, North and South and Metro have both been sold to private publishers, which is fantastic for them. They'll get the real care they need. And then there's another 5 titles which we are still either looking to bring back or to sell to prospective publishers, which we'll have a decision on in the next few weeks. We're just working through that with a few other parties, but we thought we'd better get the good news out now and get going with recruiting the teams and setting back up the operation in New Zealand.
And how is that recruitment likely to work? Are these a lot of people who lost their jobs a few months ago coming back into the office, new jobs? How many are you looking at there?
At this stage, around 40 people to restart. We haven't obviously spoken to anyone yet, apart from Stuart Dick and Sarah Henry, who will be the GM and editorial director. But there'll be a lot of phone calls being made over the next few days, and yeah, it will be all staff that worked for us previously, hopefully able to come back and get the passion and restart those wonderful brands.
How does that compare to the number of job losses that happened around the time of the closures, Brendan?
Yeah, it is substantially less than what we had previously. We were a very big sales team in that by having a lot of smaller titles, they take up a lot more people and effort. So now it's a bit more of a consolidated, targeted group of titles which don't need that same level of sales support that we had previously. And operationally, we draw it on the Australian business to provide a lot of the back-end support around finance and circulation management and subscription management and all those types of roles. So it is less than we had prior, but it's sustainable, and we're really hoping we can grow it over the medium to long term and have more and more people back.
Can we expect changes in terms of what readers are actually seeing with these publications? They're pretty iconic. Is it going to be the same thing?
Yeah, it will be. It will be. They are iconic. They've been around for a very long time, New Zealand Listener and New Zealand Women's Weekly since the 1930s. So, yeah, we'll bring them back as they were previously. And, as I said, we'll improve the current Australian Women's Weekly and Women's Day with more New Zealand content in those titles than there is now.
How about for readers who, for the past few months, might have been missing out on the magazines that they've been subscribing to? They may have, a subscription and have missed out on copies. What's happening for them?
Yeah, so they subscribe to a number of issues, so they will definitely fulfil them. So any issues they've missed will go on the back of their subscription, so they continue to get all the copies they signed up for. So yeah, I just thank them for their patience and waiting for us to make this decision on New Zealand Listener. It was a tricky time with the COVID restrictions and with ownership changes here in Australia. So delighted we could bring them back and bring back their favourite magazines.
It's still a tough media landscape out there, and I guess print is really feeling it at the moment. How are you confident that this is sustainable and this isn't going to crop up again for a lot of these outlets?
Yeah, look, they're big retail circulation models, so they sell a lot of copies in supermarkets and they have a lot of subscribers. So that's performed really well both in Australia and New Zealand. Actually, copy sales are up during this period as people turn to trusted advice that magazines provide. So in terms of our copy sales, we're doing better than ever. The advertising's been a bit harder across all media, but the New Zealand economy seems to be sparking back to life, so much more positive there than we are in Australia around the advertising markets, and Cura is doing incredibly well at the moment as we put the first new issue out to the printers at the moment. So but we're very confident in this portfolio.
And when can we expect those next copies to be on shelves or in letterboxes?
That will be early September. A lot of people hopefully can start work as soon as we can to bit of a month's lead-in time to get the content ready, and then, delivered early September.
And the Kia Ora magazine, is that August or September as well?
That's actually, one's just gone to print, so I presume that will be on flights next week.
It is 18 minutes past 6. I'm Nita Blake-Person in for Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Some more feedback coming in on National's infrastructure plan. Fantastic, a real infrastructure plan. Heavy rail to the airport, not a tram line down Dominion Road. This plan gets us back on track after Labor cancelled key initiatives to boost productivity, like the East-West Connection, and instead launched vanity projects like light rail. Another one, cool, $31 million on roading. Tairua might finally get a 2-lane bridge. That will make the locals happy. No more roadblocks for miles. About time. Another one, the Manawatu Gorge has been shut a long time. Love a tunnel here too. More tunnels would be great. And this email says, the National's transport policy is for transport and is brilliant. Transport infrastructure, in fact, Bishop is well informed, and Judith Collins is going to give Cindy a few things to talk about. Sporting rivalries can span countries or be bitter battles between clubs, but for some, the competition is even closer to home. Families are divided on game day when siblings or parents and offspring find themselves in opposite teams. Tomorrow, 2 of the 3 Super Rugby Aotearoa sides with a Barrett brother in the squad will clash when the Hurricanes and Blues meet for a second time. On Sunday, the Gatlin family will be split when the Chiefs host the Highlanders, and the Selby Rickett whānau insist they won't be playing favourites when the Southern Steel and Mainland Tactics meet again in netball's ANZ Premiership on Monday. Felicity Reid reports.
The Selby Rickett family have learnt silence is the best form of support. Hud Rickett and Miriana Selby are big netball fans who can often be found in the stands supporting their daughters, Southern Steel co-captain Te Hungareo and Mainland Tactics and Silver Fern shooter Tapaya. But casual fans of the ANZ Premiership wouldn't know they were there. Te Hungareo says her parents' low profile comes from experience.
With our season campaigners, you will not hear a word from them when you're sitting next to them at all. Either way, they might clap at one point, but they will never say anything because they have learned the hard way a couple of times that you can't say anything, so you don't know where you're sitting or who you're sitting around.
In fact, she says it's unlikely that her biggest supporters will even be wearing any team merchandise.
They come down to Invercargill usually if I can get them something warm, or sometimes my mum wears a shirt, but in Invercargill you have to wear about 5 jackets over the top of it. They do that, but in general, no, not really. My mum just wears purple and that's about it. No, why? She just loves purple.
If Miriana Selby is spotted in purple this season, it could be because it's a mix of steel blue and Tactics red, and because she is determined to sit on the fence when it comes to supporting her girls.
A bit nerve-wracking, I've got to say. We have to be diplomatic around the girls too. We don't want them to think that we favour one or the other. We definitely don't. We enjoy the moment, don't know how long it's going to last in terms of how long their careers are going to be, and we really wish them and their teams well.
Despite Tapai having the upper hand after a new side won their first encounter of the ANZ Premiership this season, Te Hungareo says there is no rivalry between the sisters.
We never skite or anything when we're playing. Once the game's over, we should get over it and then move on to talking about something else.
Super Rugby Aotearoa has a few brothers playing on opposing sides, but only one father and son combination who have gone head-to-head. Bryn Gatlin's last-minute drop goal heroics to help the Highlanders beat the Chiefs was a storyline that went around the world following the opening game of the competition. Bryn's dad Warren coaches the Chiefs, and it was only the second time the Gatlins have been on opposing sides of the rugby field. The first time was in 2017 when Warren's British and Irish Lions visited New Zealand and played against the New Zealand Provincial Barbarians, which had a 22-year-old Bryn at pivot. Like he did against the Chiefs, Bryn had a noteworthy game against the Lions. With another potential father versus son matchup on the horizon, Bryn says he wasn't really talking much with his dad this week.
Leading up to a game for me, usually I might have a chat to him or the family and whatnot, but
if I'm actually playing against him, the conversations end up being a wee bit different. We don't usually talk about rugby or anything. We just sort of ask how each other are going.
Although his family back the Chiefs, Warren knows where he sits when it comes to who the family, including wife Trudy and daughter Gabby, will be supporting.
He's the favourite son, and his mother and his sister are going to be cheering for him. But obviously I've been incredibly fortunate over the years that they've given me so much support, so I can live with the fact that they're going to hope that he does well. He's still a young man, and they want to support him, and I understand that. So I unfortunately have to play second fiddle to the favourite son every now and again, particularly when we are up against each other.
Bryn has missed being named for the Highlanders this weekend, but Gatlin Senior says he's looking forward to a bit of payback as his struggling Chiefs try for their first win of the Super Rugby Aotearoa season. However, first it will be the Battle of the Barretts and for the title of the best fullback in the country, as Geordie lines up in the number 15 jersey for the Hurricanes, and Bowden once again will be at the back in Wellington, but this time for the Blues. For Checkpoint, Felicity Reid.
Finally tonight, there's been a perfect ending to the mysterious case of Martin's missing Moggy. Rodney the cat was adopted by the North Island town's ITM store as a kitten 10 years ago and became a hit with customers. Last month, Rodney disappeared, and after a concerned customer started digging around, it was revealed a store manager had dumped the feline in the countryside. The Martin store owner, Rob James, appeared here on Checkpoint in June and apologised. He said the cat had become a bit of a nuisance and had been dumped by a staff member who had since been stood down. Now, that was when things got a bit feral. People began pulling their business from the ITM store, and Rob told us some staff had received death threats from angry customers who were worried about Rodney. Well, this evening we have some good news. The Martin Moggy's Facebook page has tonight revealed Rodney had been found on a local farm earlier this week. Our reporter Nick Trubridge spoke to Martin Moggy's Rebecca Stevenson a short time ago.
So Rodney was found about 13k, give or take, from where he was originally dumped. So he kind of headed in the opposite direction to town. And some people sort of saw the newspaper, and he was obviously on the front page of most newspapers, and they read that and they thought, heck, that looks a lot like a cat that's suddenly appeared at our house. And they sent a photo through to ITM, and then ITM sent the photo to us and called us and said, hey, we think we've got Rodney. And sure enough, it was him. So we as soon as we heard that, we went down, we set some traps with the family that were down there, and then they gave us a call about 3 hours later and said he's in one of the traps, and we were able to go down, grab him and go from there.
Can you just tell us exactly how long he's been, I suppose, sort of out on his own?
It's about a month. I believe it was Thursday the 18th of June, but that could be incorrect. It's, roughly a month, yeah.
Rebecca, obviously Rodney has been out on his own for some time. What was your reaction when you heard that it sounded like he had been found?
Well, we were, beyond excited. We were still very, cautious to make sure that we did everything correctly and to make sure that it was in fact him, So as soon as we got the call, we went out straight away, we set traps, and and then once we had him kind of in our trap and back here and we were able to look at him, it was kind of a bit of disbelief, like, oh my gosh, is it actually him? Like, we were so excited. And then we had someone come over to confirm it was Rodney the following day. And then from there we were like, oh my gosh, just so happy, like a month of blood, sweat and tears put into trying to get him home. And we finally, had done it. So we were so happy.
Were you preparing for the worst?
Yeah, for sure. We were, obviously you never want to give up hope or anything, and we hadn't. We were still doing, we were still responding if people thought that they'd seen a sighting. We had spaces set up for him. We were still searching, going to the dump site, checking things out. But, of course, a month goes on. He's an older cat. It was, the odds were not exactly on his side. But the fact that he's here alive and well is so awesome. Like, we're so happy.
What sort of shape was he in?
He was in good shape. We obviously got him checked over by the vet. He's had all his blood tests and stuff like that taken. So, but yeah, when we got him, he was in really good condition. He's obviously hungry and thirsty, but he's been enjoying having unlimited food and water since then.
How many, I suppose, at the height of this search for Rodney, how many people in Martin would have been out there, or Martin and surrounding areas?
Oh, a lot. I couldn't give you an exact number, but the support from the community has been amazing. You know, we could not be more thankful for the support that we've received, whether it's been through, just like nice comments, support, whether it's been people going out and looking, whether it's been food donations, whether it's been donations that like the loaning of traps and all that kind of thing. It's just, we're so grateful for all the support.
What now for Rodney?
So for now, he'll take a couple of weeks here, minimum a couple of weeks, just to settle down. We can keep an eye on him, make sure he's trekking along nicely. He's had a pretty rough month, so the last thing we want to do is upset him more and, find him a home right now. So we'll just keep him here, monitoring him, just building up his confidence and all that kind of thing again. And then in a couple of months' time, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll start our process of finding him a forever home and finding the perfect family to look after him and for him to live in.
That was Rebecca Stevenson from Martin Moggies speaking to our reporter Nick Trubridge. And that's Checkpoint for this evening. Thanks for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you chose to connect with us today. You can catch up on our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page. And for all the latest news, information, feature stories from New Zealand and all around the world, go to the rnz.co.nz homepage. If you live in Northland and you've been impacted by that heavy rain and thunderstorms this evening, take care. So from me, Nita Blakeperson, and the Checkpoint team, have a great weekend. We'll be back next week.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Anna Thomas. National maintains it can satisfy environmental concerns with its plans to repeal the Resource Management Act. Northland has been hit with flash floods, leaving 650 homes on the Koutou Peninsula without power. Parts of the far north have had a month's worth of rain in less than a day. A revamped Super Rugby competition next year will include a Pacifica team, leaving out South Africa, Argentina and Japan. And some of the country's most well-loved magazines are returning after Bauer Media announced it was wrapping up some of its New Zealand titles during lockdown. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Friday Night Live with a 2002 performance from country music legend Barry Saunders. John and Liz from the Beths picked tonight's mixtape, and tonight's Sonic Tonic is dedicated to Full Moon. That's Nights with me,